Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and today we're digging into transplanting tips to help your seedlings get off to a great start in your garden. I've been slowly working on digging my garden beds, laying cardboard and wood chips down for the no-dig garden. It's most likely going to be coming into play next year rather than this year. It's honestly taking a long time to build the garden beds with all the other projects that we've got going on here on the homestead. We've got a massive barn that's being demoed in about a week's time. So there's a lot of things that we're having to do to get things prepped for that. And that's taking a lot more time than we would like. So, you're having to kind of reprioritize things, and, digging a garden bed does definitely take its time, but adapting is what homesteaders do best. Now, I'm still starting seeds indoors. I've got corn, melon, watermelon and squash all getting started this month, and the cool weather veggies are really well overdue in getting, outside at this point. So today I wanted to dig in and talk about helping your transplants thrive. So let's get stuck in, because step one is getting your plants hardened off. So we want to be putting them outside in a sheltered place for increasing lengths of time. Now, I get it. If you're at work, you're not going to be able to, put your plants out for an hour and then, bring them back in, an hour later, unless you're fortunate enough to be working from home. One of the things that I did when I had a long commute was I would often be putting plants out well before 6 a.m, and I put them out in a cold frame. And, you need to keep the cold frame out of direct sun, but you want to be gradually opening up the lid of the cold frame over a number of days. I would also typically start off my hardening off process on a weekend or on a Friday evening. So, take them out for, an hour on a Friday evening if it wasn't too cold, somewhere sheltered. So somewhere where it's not gusting lots of wind, they're kind of protected from, a lot of fluctuation in temperature. But having a cold frame was really, really valuable, because it meant that I could put my plants out in the morning and leave the lid closed for the first day whilst I was at work. And then I would come home from work and take them inside, because temperatures are still a little chilly and quite variable. So having that option of the cold frame really helped me to be able to harden things up a lot easier, and a lot less stress than, kind of just taking out trays of seedlings. And that's kind of what I've been doing right now, because I didn't have a cold frame, was taking out flats of seedlings. And I've had ones that had gotten blown off, knocked over by a dog, trodden on. I've lost a lot of seeds or seedlings over the last couple of weeks by trying to harden things off. So a tip from me is to put them somewhere where your beloved four-legged pets are not going to be trampling all over them. But also, if you have an ability to build a cold frame, there's lots of different, recycled materials that you can use to make a cold frame. I know I've written a couple of blog posts about cold frames, but also just searching online for, recycled material cold frames. I've made ones out of old windows, old shower doors that I picked up from a thrift store. There's lots of things that you can do. If you don't really need to have a lot of tools to make them either. You can also make them out of straw bales and bits of plastic. There's lots of different things that you can do. Bricks, bits of plastic as well. And if you don't have those, then you could also look to, having something to just kind of cover your plants. Maybe placing them in one of those plastic box salad containers, again, somewhere out of direct sunlight, because you don't want to cook your transplants. But the plastic's going to just kind of warm things up a little bit with the light, but it's going to help keep the cold off your plants. You could also use, milk jugs with the bottom cut off, or a large 2-litre fizzy drink bottle, something like that, that's going to give them a little bit of protection. But again, keep them out of direct sunlight so your plants are not kind of cooking in there. If you're using the bottle technique, then you'll want to take the lid off gradually to allow more air to get into there, so your plants can, start to feel a little bit more of what it's like outside. And I know gardeners who don't bother hardening off their plants. They just plant them straight outside. Sometimes they use a hoop house or under some frost fleece. Other times they're using the old plastic bottle trick and just kind of putting things out there. And sometimes they've got a cap on them that they screw back on overnight to try and keep some of that, cooler temperature off the plant. But during the day, they unscrew all the lids on those bottles and let the plants just kind of sit in those. So, there's definite things that work for other gardeners. And that's why I always say there's so many different ways to garden. There's, as many ways to garden as there are people on the planet. You just got to find what works for you. Definitely in a mild area. Certainly when I was in the UK, I did the, plastic bottle trick and it worked fine. It might work out here in Maine. I don't know yet. Right now, though, all of my plastic milk jugs have been used for winter sowing, and they are definitely needing transplanting at this point. Yesterday, I think I transplanted, around 20 winter king Savoy cabbages. So that was kind of exciting. But, for a lot of you that are just kind of getting started with the garden, it's easy to get overly complicated with the garden. And if you don't want to try hardening off your plants, you don't necessarily need to, but you're going to need to provide them a little bit of cover from the variable weather. Certainly where I am in Maine, the weather's pretty variable and fluctuates until really after the end of May. And one of my tips is, if you're going to be putting plants out sooner, obviously you want to stick with those cool weather crops, things like your brassicas, lettuces, stuff like that. You don't necessarily want to be putting out your eggplants, peppers, tomatoes and things yet if you're in the northern states, just because you can still have a late frost, and once those temperatures drop really below sort of 40, your eggplants, peppers and tomatoes are done. They really struggle to recover from that, and because they're so frost sensitive. So as much as you want to get those plants out, it's better to wait until after that last frost date in spring. All right. So right now, I'm chatting with neighbors. I am trying to find out when is the typical last frost. I'm looking online and kind of seeing what the temperatures and things are, because it's been glorious sunshine here over the last couple of days. And I'm fighting that battle myself to not plant out my tender summer crops too early. And most of the folks that I've talked to have all said that you don't want to be putting those things out until 1st of June. So that is what I am going to do. But it's supposed to be a really nice day, so maybe I can bring them outside during lunch if it is warm, just to let them have some sunshine, feel the breeze around their leaves, and hopefully that'll kind of make things a little bit happier, because they've been inside a long time at this point. All right, let's talk about step 2 with your transplants, and that is adequate water. As your plants are coming outside, you're going to notice that they're drying out faster. It's a bit stressful for your seedlings as they harden off. You're going to notice they're using up a lot more water, given that, you've got wind blowing around, there's evaporative loss from the sun. You're going to be losing water, and water helps to ease some of that stress that transplanting is going to have. So you want to water your seedlings about an hour before you plan to transplant them. And then once you've transplanted your seedlings into the garden or into a container, you need to water your plant in, and that's watering the plant again after you've transplanted them, because that's going to help the roots settle into their new home, and it's going to reduce what's known as transplant shock, which is basically where your plants totally freak out because they're in somewhere new. There's a lot of things being thrown at them, right? They've got the sun, they've got different temperatures on a night, different temperatures on an evening, the soil's kind of new, there's a lot of things that they're trying to cope with all at once. And if we can at least give them plenty of water, that's going to help alleviate a little bit of the issues that are happening there. Step number 3 is compost. So give your new transplant a nutrient boost with a handful of compost in the planting hole. I like to dig the compost in a bit with, a handheld garden fork or, a little trowel or something. So, I'll put the compost into the hole that I've dug, and I'll just kind of chop it up into the hole a little bit, or work it in, just so, those plant roots have got something that's going to help give them a nutrient boost when, they're able to use that compost. But it also kind of helps them, at least I think it helps them sort of be able to put their roots out into the soil, and go and explore a little more. So I always like to put some into the planting hole. But then after I've kind of, firmed in my plant, so that's when you put your plant into the planting hole, and then you kind of press down on it, usually with your hands, or sometimes people do it with their feet, and it's called healing in. But either way, like once you've kind of transplanted that plant, I like to put some more compost around the base of the plant, just to kind of act a little bit like a mulch, right? And I know I talk about mulch all the time, but we want to be able to help retain that moisture, and compost is really good at doing that. So not only is compost in the planting hole going to help retain some of the moisture from when you water in your plant, but also having compost on top is going to help retain some of the water from being lost from, immediately around that plant, and help keep those roots nice and moist, help keep your plant a little bit more happy. Granted, right now where I am, I don't have a lot of compost that's finished. My compost heap was underwater quite a bit after the snow melted. It now isn't, which is great. And actually, for those of you that were sort of wondering in the Facebook group, the water's gone, which is great. But it's still kind of soggy over there. So if you don't have compost, it's not a huge loss. You can use other things as a mulch, but I wouldn't recommend putting things like, wood chips or grass clippings. Oh, we don't want that in the garden. Grass clippings, if I can talk appropriately during a podcast. But yeah, I wouldn't put things like wood chips or grass clippings into the planting hole, but you could certainly put them around the top, around the base of the plant. That's going to help retain moisture. And things like grass clippings and mulch as a mulch, they break down pretty rapidly in the garden. Wood chips take a longer time to break down, but they're pretty good at helping to retain moisture in the soil. So use what you have. That's certainly what I'm doing on the homestead, is I'm using what I have available to help mulch and keep the water into the soil. Because again, water is going to help your plants get established. So those 3 things, hardening off, making sure there's adequate water, and, adding some compost or some mulch, those are really the main things when it comes to transplanting the plants. Like, I've tried having things in, containers that'll break down or, decompose, compostable pots and things like that. And yeah, they work kind of. I've found that I have to break things open and stuff. And I have just as much success, when I've got seedlings that are in a larger container, like, one of those salad boxes. I'm just kind of pulling them apart gently and planting them out. So it just is down to what you prefer. Like, I prefer having fewer containers that I'm having to pull things out of. So I like to put things in, seedling flats, or, those little modules and stuff to plant out, which is fine. Those things all work great. I've also done individual, plants in little cups and things, and you just have to gently ease the plant out. So if you've got things in a single container or a pot that you're trying to get your plant out of, the best thing that I've found to do is, if you're doing, kind of the Spock sign, right? For all of you Trekkies out there, right? If you're doing that, but you use that V that you're creating with your fingers to put the plant through, and then gently squeeze off the pot or the container that your plant is in. So, you want to be gentle with this because you don't want to disrupt the roots too much, because that's going to stress out the plant even more. So gently ease off the planter pot or container that you've got there. And, with one hand, you're trying to kind of keep the soil and things together and not drop your plant, although I've dropped the plant before too, believe me. Keep it all together and then gently turn it the right way up and plant it into the ground. And you don't want to be planting too deep for your plants, with the exception being tomatoes, where you can plant a lot deeper because it's going to form roots all along that stem. But for most plants, you want to keep them at the same height that their first two leaves are, or the soil level of the container. So you don't want to plant that pot that you had, you don't want to put that lower than the soil level. You want to keep that all at the soil level, and that's going to help your plants settle in a lot easier, and it'll help reduce having issues with like your stems rotting and your plants dying and things too. So that's another trick. And really, those few main things that we talked about, that's really the crux of getting your transplants out. But there are a couple of other tricks that I've learned along the way, and one of them is transplanting on an overcast day or when it's cooler in the day. Hot days with lots of sun mean that the water is going to evaporate and it's going to leave your plants hot and thirsty, and it's going to stress them out, right? One of the things that we want to do with transplanting is we want to make it as stressless as possible, right? Keep them nice and happy. They're going to establish themselves a lot quicker, and then our garden is going to grow better. Whilst we can't always plant out our seedlings on an overcast day, although it felt like it when I lived in England, a lot of things that we can do is, if we know the area that we're in, right? I mean, certainly afternoons where I live are very much cooler than, the mornings. So I would always look to be planting in the afternoon if I was going to be transplanting things. When I was in Utah, I tried to do things, earlier in the morning, or very, very late in the evening, not quite like 10 o'clock at night, but, certainly after 8 p.m. was when I would do some transplanting too, because I wanted to be able to allow my plants to settle in without losing all that water in the soil. So get to know your environment a little bit, like when is cooler for you in the garden, and try to kind of transplant around those days. And if it's an overcast day, great. I've even transplanted things in the rain, which was great because then I didn't need to do the extra watering in. But have fun with transplanting things. I always find it's quite therapeutic to go out and transplant things. And one of the other things that I learnt was using either organic kelp or seaweed liquid fertilizers as I was watering in the transplants. Those seem to help the seedlings in my garden. Like, I seem to have lost fewer plants to Transplant Shock when I've used it, and I've tried both ones that I've made myself and ones that I've purchased, and they both seem to work just as well. But that was one trick that I learned from another gardener, was using kelp or seaweed to help with easing your plants out into the garden, and you can definitely look to use that too. You also want to make sure that you transplant your seedlings with enough space between them. And the reason why I say that is because you don't want to have to move them again after you've gone to all the effort of putting them out there. And this is really important, giving your seedlings enough space to grow if you live in a humid climate where diseases spread rapidly. It's also good to remember that certain plants, whilst they are small as transplants, will get much bigger. Cabbages, for example, right? I think I've planted, about 20 of them over the last couple of days, and cabbages get quite big, and you need to give them space to be able to grow. And the reason why we want to give them space is so that they can form a nice big head of cabbage, right? But also so they're not competing for all the nutrients, right? The closer you've got things together, the more they're going to start competing for the nutrients and things in the soil. So not only do we want to give things space to have airflow moving around them, to reduce diseases being spread too rapidly, but also to be able to, have each plant have adequate nutrition in the garden. And this was a mistake that I made as a young beginner gardener. I used to do it all the time, and my grandmother would be digging up things afterwards and having to move them so they had more space. And sometimes those plants that were transplanted again, they often didn't make it. So, save yourself some of the headache and give them plenty of space. And if you find, like, after your plants have gotten established that there's too much space, well, maybe rethink that as being, I need to put them a bit closer. Maybe see that space as, well, I've got an opportunity to put in some fast-growing vegetables, like, I don't know, lettuce or radishes or some bush beans or something. Or maybe you could transplant some marigolds or herbs like basil, coriander, parsley or cilantro into that space. And that's a great way to kind of add some companion plants into your normal garden. And that's what I do. Even if I have transplants that don't make it in the garden and it frees up a spot in a row or within a garden bed, I'll just go back and fill it in with something else. Like, I've always got salad seedlings started that I can just, pop out into the garden, wherever there's a gap. Like, I'll often put lettuce in there. But also, having, plants on hand like marigolds or, a variety of herbs that you can just kind of, quickly put out into the garden. That's a really great way to fill space, but also attract other beneficial insects that are going to help your garden grow. And if you've been listening to the integrated pest management stuff, then you know that there's a lot of different plants that you can consider putting into some of that space. But I would love to hear from you and know what your transplanting tips are. So go ahead and share them in the Facebook group and help other gardeners grow their own food. If you're not part of the Facebook group, then the link is in the description of this podcast. So I hope I can see you over there. Right now, it's off to dust off my hat and overalls and grab the chainsaw. So until next time, I hope your garden grows beautifully, and I will see you all next week.